Hello and welcome back to this edition of Daily Active brought to you by Bootleg Macro. I am Dustin. This is where we look at the most active stocks on Yahoo Finance for the day. I'm going to go down this list here. We're going to be looking at NVDA, Tesla, Warner Brothers Discovery, Intel Corporation, and Lucid. The thing that I like to do when I'm looking at this kind of data is I like to get an idea holistically, not just of the trend, not just of the price, not just of the volume, but as well as the volatility and some of those correlations. Now, you can see it's taking a little second here, and that's mostly because I just deleted the data because I was working on a video right before this and I needed to rerun specifically for NVIDIA, so it took a second for it to collect it. But what you see here is we've got a line chart. Now, this line chart essentially is going to be showing us what I believe is going to be a probabilistic range. So the top of the range is where I think that I'd be selling a little bit. The bottom of the range is where I think I'd be buying a little bit. We see the green bars underneath. That means that it's bullish. When we see these red bars, that means that it's bearish. But when we look at this more up close, if we're looking at this in the past 6 months or so, what I like to see is that essentially we've seen a complete transition from bearish to bullish in NVIDIA since May 8th. It has been on an absolute tear since then. And the thing that I love to see is mostly when I start to see the top of the range is higher highs, as well as the bottom of the range when it starts to expand and then starts to ride and has a higher low as well. Now, in the middle here, it looks like somewhere around the middle of like June, the very beginning of June here, we essentially saw NVIDIA go sideways. Now, I'm not sure if that is indicative of digestion, congestion, or people just dispersing their shares as things started to kind of hit the level where they wanted to be able to get out because they were underwater for a bit, especially if we look at where NVIDIA has come from. NVIDIA was up here around this price of essentially like 147 for a while and then was below it. So as we got into that level, people started to sell, is my understanding. But if we take a look at what we're seeing in the overall market itself in terms of NVIDIA, we see that since the beginning of May, it looks like we've had a pretty consistent trend. Now, when I think about the way that stuff should trend, I think about it from the lens of volatility. I've got my own volatility like method here that I've essentially built over time, and I'm turning it into this app. Now, the thing that I like to pay attention to is when volatility is falling like this. When I see volatility falling, for me, that is generally going to be the indication that I'm seeing the actual trend. So we see volatility falling back here in March, but we don't really, this is when things were in a downtrend. So volatility is falling. We are getting negative price appreciation here. Now, if you're looking at what this red line means or the green lines that you're seeing recently, that is bullish and bearish signals. So for me, what I'm thinking is that when I'm seeing bearishness, I'm looking at when we start to fall in terms of volatility and starting to go down, we are starting to see that the price is falling. For me, that is a great indication of the type of trend that we're actually in. So when I look right now and I see that we had falling volatility here in the very beginning of June, we saw slight price appreciation. Now we're starting to see volatility falling again, and now we're starting to get a little bit more breakout to a higher high. That is what I'm looking for personally. When I'm looking at this, I can use my volatility, but then I also have the correlation of the price to volatility. And the thing that I love is when I start to see volatility fall and I already have a negative correlation. See, the thing is when you have a negative correlation and volatility is falling to price, that means that the price is generally going to go up, but slightly up because two negatives are going to make a positive here, right? So I've got the additional volatility. This is more standard volatility underneath. I don't really care for this. I don't think it's as useful. One of the principles that I personally believe in is why I built it this way is that I think that if you stare at the exact same things that every other trader, every other investor, every other person who's in the market is looking at, you're going to get the exact same results, and that's not going to generate alpha, in my opinion. So what I've done is when I think about looking for volatility falling and correlations being negative, what I've done is I've built what is considered to be like a future price path. This is based off of the idea that if volatility is falling, which you can now see that it is, and I put the volatility right here, you see volatility is falling and the correlation is negative, you should see the price is rising. Now, the most important thing when you think about this price path is, well, how long has price been rising? See, for me, I look at it from the perspective of everything needs to show me 2 days in a row. So for me, the price has been rising for a very long time. It looks like, again, June 11th is when we see the prices really starting to rise. We got 2 days in a row on the 12th at 145. Would have been a great day to buy. This is probably slightly confusing because you've never seen something like this before. But when I see the price as a green background with black lettering, to me, that means it's in the middle of its standard deviation range. So if it's in the middle of its range, I know it's on a bullish sentiment and I know that we have a price to rise. That is the place to buy, in my opinion. So when we look at this, we got a price to rise that was confirmed on the 6th. We had price to rise until we got two price to fall here at the very end of June, very beginning of July. That is, honestly, that is the very end of a quarter. That is the transition from Q2 to Q3, and it is going into a holiday weekend in the United States. So you would expect that you would see prices at least be reduced. Generally, you'd want to see it on lower volume than you see higher volume right there. But I do think that as you start to get into what was the end of this week, which is right before July 4th in the United States, you saw 143 million shares traded, and that was your double confirmation of the price to rise. It may not have been been necessarily with the green background with the black lettering, but you really don't get that inside of NVIDIA because this is one of those marquee names, one of the meme stocks, one of those things that's really carrying the entire market higher. So when I start to think about what I'd be looking for here, when I start to see this flip back from the price to fall, from price to rise, I see that the sentiment is still very, very bullish. I know that I've got higher highs, which is very, very bullish to me. And I see that the price is only two standard deviations above its mean. This would have been a good place for me to start trying to enter a little bit, just because I had the expectation based on what I paid attention to is that price is going to tell you a lot, volume is going to tell you a lot, and volatility is going to tell you a lot. Now, I will use the higher highs and the higher lows in my range to really like augment my actual perspective. But you can see right here on the 22nd of July, when we had this dip down, essentially, NVIDIA fell for what looks like three individual days in a row. It was down 5 days on the rolling negative return, 2.15% that day, and it was green with the black background. That was the day to buy, in my opinion. The way that I'm looking at things of how I'm going to spend my own money is that's what I'd be paying attention to. I believe I've ended up buying like the Qs at that point, just because this is a big, heavy overweight in the Qs. And I'm looking at the type of stuff that I think, in my opinion, is much more valuable than just staring at a chart. I think if you're going to look at a chart like this, that's completely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's exactly how I started when I was looking at markets initially. But now when I want to take a much more in-depth perspective, I need to have an understanding of where are we in the range. Well, first off, the most important thing, and this is how I would think about it. First off, is what is the sentiment? Are we bullish or bearish? Like, what is the overall trend? Just doesn't matter what the price is, doesn't matter what the volume is doing. Are we bullish or bearish? That's going to give me my idea. Then I want to start looking at if we're bullish or bearish, where's the actual price? Is it in the middle of the range? Because that's a great place to buy. And then based on where I'm seeing in the middle of the range, is this the type of stock that is making higher highs and higher lows? That's what I'm looking for. And I'm actually going to show you a different stock that is going to show you something completely different, where you're seeing the transition from bullish, or we saw the transition from bullish to bearish, which we're not seeing in NVIDIA at the moment, which is CHWY. So CHWY here is showing us where this thing was incredibly bullish right here. It looks like in the middle of April, all the way until it had this high, right? At the very beginning of June. And it's essentially that was the transition into it turning bearish. And now you're seeing lower lows in the in the range. You're seeing you're seeing lower highs in the range and lower lows. As well as when I look at the overall candlestick here, I can see that that was a break where we were still bullish. We did not break, but we got a bearish sentiment essentially starting, it looks like. We got bearish sentiment starting on the 30th of June, which again, based on what we saw in the video, was the very end of the quarter. You can see here, based on the volatility, we saw an incredibly aggressive move. And see, as I mentioned with NVIDIA to begin with, when you start to see the falling volatility, that is when trend really exposes itself. What we're seeing here is that we saw this peak. The peak was the peak in volatility. And then this transition to a negative or a falling volatility was when we saw that gap down, and then the start of a new trend, which is very, very bearish. Right. And what you could tell as well is that when we're looking at the volatility, yeah, the volatility was falling and rising a little bit here, but the correlation was very high. So if we go down and we start to look at what this future price path was, because we know that we were looking at the very, very, it looks like the beginning of June is where things started to change. We see we were at $45 and then we were down 11% on the 11th, right? So volatility starts falling. The correlation hadn't necessarily flipped because it takes a few days for you to be able to actually track the correlation of two different things to each other. But you see here we were down 11% from the 10th to the 11th. We were down from $45 to $41. And essentially that was the beginning. We saw a massive bearish move. We held the bullishness for a little bit, where we see that CHWY started to actually fight its way back and started to be positive on the 1 day and the 5 day, still negative on the 15 day and the 1 month. But as we start to look, now we're starting to get more of this price to fall. We're starting to see that we're gonna continue to be negative. We're still positive at this point, at this moment, on the 25th of June on CHWY. But what you can tell is that, okay, if we're gonna see any resumption, we need the highs to be higher. We need this price to start capturing above at least what the trade level is, because we've been underneath it ever since the 11th. We've been underneath the trade level. That's incredibly negative when you think about two different pieces of information are not confirming. You're seeing bullish sentiment, but it's underneath the trade level. That doesn't make any sense unless you're going to resume the bullish level, which that's a good place to buy. But this is a great indication of something that was going to be negative and continuing to be negative. We finally get the bearishness on the 30th of June. We see the volatility is rising. We're starting to flip between price to fall, price to rise, and we finally get the double confirmation here of price to fall on the 2nd of June at $40.98. We are negative on the 1 day, the 5 day, the 15 day, and the 1 month. We're still bearish, still into the trade level. We are making lower highs now in the range. And this was a great indication of something that I know that I should have gotten out of at the time. The reason why is because what was I fighting? Was I fighting the bearish trend? Was I fighting it being under the trade level? Underneath the trade level? Was I fighting it having a lower low in the range? These are the type of things that I'm looking for when I want to see something going from bullish to bearish. And obviously it's the reverse if you're going from bearish to bullish. But this is how you can tell by using this tool a significant difference in what you're seeing in NVIDIA as well as in CHWY. And when we see that we've got blue lettering with that black background, that tells me that we are 2 standard deviations below our trade level, which for me is a very concerning signal from what I'm seeing. As well as now we can see that we are negative on the 1 day, 5 day, 15 day, 1 month, and we're just flipped on the 3 month, and we've just started to go negative on the 6 month as well. CHWY is the exact opposite of what we're seeing inside of NVIDIA. But I want to make this quick video just to show you the differences in terms of what we're seeing in NVIDIA and what you can see when things start to flip negative and how you want to pay attention to them. What do you think of this review? Tell me in the comments below. I'll talk to you soon.